Hi everybody, it's Oksana, and today I'm going to tell you my little tips and tricks for making these little swirly loop type decorations on the ends of your wire. So I'm going to talk about how to make the nice little circle in the middle so it's not shaped like a little teardrop or a little triangle. That's something that happens a lot at first when you're starting out. I'm going to talk about how to make a really nice tight one like this. Excuse my wire being scratched up. This works better if you use nylon pliers or bare wire versus enameled wire. And I'm going to show you how to make a little swirly like this where the wire is not coiled as tight. So if you want to see my little tips and tricks on how I do this, then just keep watching. So I have a few little scrap wires that I'm going to show you. I'm going to demonstrate on. So the first thing that you want to do is grab the end of the wire with your pliers. And this is exactly how I started out. And this is very tricky because you want to grab as close to the tip of the wire as you can, but then oftentimes, here's what happens. It just snaps right off when you grab too close, and it also kind of smushes the tip of your wire, becomes a little flat, which I personally don't mind. But that can happen. So as close as you can without it sliding off. Usually you can still feel the wire with your finger. And then I like to turn. And you can either turn the actual wire around or you can turn with your hand. I generally like to turn with my hand actually, I find. But, you know, sometimes it's easier to move the wire. And here's what happens most of the time. When I first started doing this, I noticed that it looks very nice except for the very tip. The very tip right here tends to be straight because of the way that you're turning it. It's, you know, really hard to turn it so it goes in this way because of the size of the wire. This is 20 gauge wire and the size of the round nose pliers. I think these round nose pliers have a relatively thin point here. But, you know, to really get that curved under, I feel like they would need to be even thinner because, you know, this is as much as it'll fit. So when I first, you know, started out doing this, I noticed that this tip was really the problem. So what I decided to do, and this is what ended up working for me, I'm sure I'm not like the first person to think of this trick, but this really works for me, is I take my wire cutters and I cut off just that little tip. Sorry, I'm going to go like this because otherwise it's going to fly somewhere and I'll never find it again. So once you cut off that little tip, here is what you are left with. And the tip of it is kind of naturally curving in because where we cut it, it was already on a curve. So now when you grab it with your round nose pliers and you just turn a little bit, it makes a much nicer circle that's very round rather than having that flat little line. And here's another thing that you can do, and you can do this at the same time when you're cutting off the tip, but I'm going to show you this now, so I'm going to have to cut it again. So when you're actually trimming off that tip, what you can do is you can hold your cutters like this at an angle, and let me show you what you'll get. All right, so what you get is that it's cut at an angle and you almost have like a very fine point at the tip. So when you curve it, it touches really nicely with the other wire like that. You can even do it more. Mine didn't come out as, you know, straight as I wanted it, but you can do it in a really nice angle and just have this wire really connect nicely. And then what you might want to think about is how big do you want this little circle to look. Sometimes this size looks really nice, but sometimes you're kind of wishing it was smaller and you're really restricted by the size of your pliers. So what you can do once you have a nice curve going is you can take your regular pliers, and this is kind of tricky, you got to hold it good, and I don't know if I can hold it well enough on camera. But you hold it just like this, the very top and the very bottom, this tip of the pliers against the wire, and you just very gently press. You don't want to press too hard, and you don't want to press too much because now it's becoming an oval, and if yours start to, you know, get unflat, you just can flatten it like this. So you don't want it to become an oval, so then you squish it. Oh, you can't see that. You squish it this way too. And this part can be a little hard. It's hard to get it with the tips. Sometimes you have to do it with this deeper part. So let me try to do this on camera. All right, so now it's becoming a much, much tinier little circle, and you can kind of keep going with this. Keep in mind that if your wire is colored like mine, oops, I just twisted it, then it might mess up the coloring of your wire. Like it might get scratched. The color might get scratched off, and you can work with just bare copper wire. That helps a lot. And you can also work with nylon pliers. Those won't scratch the color off. So if you want to keep going with this little loop, what you do is you hold it like this with your pliers. And again, this can scratch off the color, holding it tight like this. But then you just push the wire this way to keep the little loop going. So yeah, you can definitely see where it scratched my color off. So this is why it's nice to work with bare wire, especially if you're doing this for the first time, because you're going to scratch up your wire in the beginning, or if you don't have nylon pliers. So this is how you would make a nice, tight little spiral. Cute looking little spiral. So I'm going to start the same way. I'm going to hold the tip. I'm going to curve it. Now you can, this is, where you can trim off the little end. I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to curve it the rest of the way. Make my nice little loop. And this time, I want the circle to stay as it is, and I want to make a little swirl, but I don't want it to be tight like that other one. I want it to have some spacing to it, because I think sometimes that looks really pretty too. So this is when I like to push the wire with my finger, because you don't have to push it super tight. You can kind of see the direction it's heading. Now your pliers are in the way. You need to move them a little bit. Move them this way. And just kind of keep bending it. At one point, it becomes a little tricky to hold. So what you have to do is you have to hold inside of your circle like this. So your circle, the spacing here can't be any thinner than this, because then, that thing will, your pliers will kind of get in the way. And see how it's getting really close right here? My spacing's going to get messed up. So I'm going to put them here now, so that when I curve, the wire doesn't come too close. And another way that you can adjust it is you can hold your round nose pliers like this, put one in the hole and one up here, and just very gently press. Actually, let me do it this way so you can see better. Very gently press, and then see that move as I press? It moved the little circle. So now it's a little bit more centered. And you can kind of keep going with this. Let me do just a little bit more of this little swirly here. All right, so this way you can get yourself a nice little swirly. Let me center it. That is not touching, where the wire isn't touching and tight like the other one. And that's about it. Those are my little tricks that I wanted to share with you. So hopefully it was helpful. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.